Hi everyone, this is Navika Chada, a cloud engineer and a Microsoft Most Valuable Professional in Developers Technology. I warmly welcome each one of you to the 10th episode of Tech Chat with Navika, wherein today we would be talking about Azure NetApp files. And to share some expertise on it, we have an expert with us today, Mr. Anthony Mashford. Anthony is a Microsoft Most Valuable Professional in Azure category, having more than 20 plus years of extensive experience in the IT industry. He is currently working as a cloud solution architect at NetApp, England, United Kingdoms. Well, Anthony has his expertise in the area of Microsoft Azure, cloud computing, and everything related to it, which includes Azure SDK, CLIs, Azure storage, data management, and the list goes on and on. Anthony has his specialization in the area of helping out organizations transform and building their business with the help of Microsoft Azure. Thank you so much, Anthony, for taking out your precious time and joining me in today, and especially for the 10th episode.
Thank you, Davika. Very kind of you to invite me to attend, and really looking forward to our chat.
Likewise, Anthony. So, without any further ado, let's get started. So, as we're seeing that many enterprises, right, they are migrating their applications to cloud, or let's get a bit specific to Azure as well, and definitely because of the well-known reasons, right, be it scalability, availability, security, and even the cost factor, which is something that we cannot miss out on. Now, if we talk about, deploying file-based applications into cloud, right, that could be a bit challenging because that might require some code refactoring or certain modification in the code, and that could be a bit challenging. And in order to overcome that challenge, we have something in place known as Azure NetApp files, right, about which we would be talking about today in today's episode. So to start with, Anthony, can you just sort of give a brief detailing about what Azure NetApp files is all about to the audience?
Yeah, sure. So Azure NetApp Files, or ANF as we call it, it's been around now for over 4 years. So it's about 4.5 years it's been generally available. And the reason it exists is to address challenges that you mentioned, with customers that have workloads and applications that they run on premises in the data center. And for various reasons, be that commercial reasons or strategic reasons, they're looking to move to the cloud, so Azure in this instance. But those applications are relying on file services, which normally on premises you get high performance, low throughput, low latency, etc. High throughput, low latency, and that's been a challenge. And previous to the Azure NetApp Files service existing, it was a huge challenge and almost a blocker to those applications being able to be essentially migrated to Azure. And then ANF came along and has been a huge enabler to unblock those challenges and allow customers to, who don't have the desire or the capability or the time to re-architect applications to be cloud native, that they can now lift and shift, deploy them within Azure, still get that high throughput and that low latency for the file services that you need. So Azure NetApp Files delivers that, and it's delivered using 3 service tiers, standard, premium, and ultra, which have varying performance. The standard tier, 16 megabytes per second of throughput per terabyte, right up to the ultra tier, which is 32 megabytes per second throughput per terabyte, which is hugely fast and sub-millisecond latency. I think that's the important thing. Some applications, the likes of SAP, that are very highly strung, they need that super low latency, and ANF can deliver that. So yeah, that's quite a very brief high-level overview of what ANF is.
Thank you for that. And as you just mentioned about these 3 performance tiers that we have in Azure NetApp Files, and how it really helps in making your performance better. So that's like we can count that as one of the advantage of benefit of using Azure NetApp Files. So if, for example, if you were to mention some top 3 or top 4 benefits of NetApp Files, so what would it be then?
Well, obviously, we've talked about the main one, and that's performance. Low latency, super high throughput. I think the biggest one is simplicity. ANF is it's a first-party service, which is really key to point out. So Azure NetApp Files is delivered, supported, and built by Microsoft. It's native Azure Resource Managed Service. And because of that, it has a REST API, so you can manage it programmatically. And you don't have to be a storage admin to understand how to use and consume Azure NetApp Files. It's a very, very simplistic service to interact with. A lot of these people, a lot of the customers that are consuming this, they're not storage admins, they're developers, they're DBAs, they're people who just want to consume storage. Storage is boring, isn't it? Storage is, let's face it, nobody likes talking about storage. It's the last thing people think about. But storage is where the data lives. And the data is interesting. And all of a sudden, then storage becomes interesting. But you don't want to spend time, deploying it, managing it, looking after it, etc. And that's the great thing about ANF. Microsoft first-party service delivered as a service, which you can consume on demand when you need it. You can scale it up, you can scale it down. So, simplicity, I think, is one of the headlines really for Azure NetApp Files. Scalability as well. It's a very, very scalable service. You can scale the volumes up and down. You can scale the throughput independently within the same service tiers. You can take volumes from one service tier to another service tier. There's a slight caveat there where if you take a volume from a lower tier to a higher tier, there's a 7-day cooling off period. But ultimately, it's scalable, flexible, and if you introduce that kind of cloud mindset into the optimization of the performance, the natural byproduct then is cost optimization. So by making those volumes flex to meet the requirement when needed and then shrink them when not, you can actually introduce quite a considerable saving to deployment. So simplicity, scalability, and it could be, depending on the workload and how you use it, quite cost effective as well.
Exactly. As I just mentioned in the beginning as well, if someone is moving into Azure or cloud in general, people actually look for such benefits, right? Be it scalability or cost optimization and simplicity, etc., etc. And since you really sort of emphasized on the simplicity part of it, this makes me very curious to know if you can just give a very high level understanding and working of Azure NetApp Files as to how it works, or some architecture if you would like to explain.
Yeah, sure. If anybody's familiar with the Azure constructs of a subscription, zones and all that sort of stuff, resource groups, etc. So within Azure NetApp Files, you have an account. Okay, so the accounts within your subscription, you create an Azure NetApp Files account. Now, the account is where essentially you locate your data. So if you've got data residency, sovereignty requirements, so Azure NetApp Files, so Azure has 66 regions now. Azure NetApp Files is in 43 of those regions globally. So, the service is pretty well distributed around the globe. But so you create your accounts where you want your data to reside. For instance, I live in the UK, so we have 2 regions, UK South, UK West. So you create your Azure NetApp Files, say in UK South, okay? And then within your Azure NetApp Files accounts is where you create your capacity pools. Now, capacity pool, imagine that in storage terms, a bit like an aggregate. So, for instance, you can have a capacity pool. Currently, the smallest capacity pool you can create is, it's in public preview, but it's 2 terabytes. So the smallest entry point is 2 terabytes. So you create, for instance, a 2 terabyte capacity pool. And the capacity pools are important. There's 2 things to understand about capacity pools. It's where you set the performance. So, for instance, you could choose a standard, a premium, or an ultra capacity pool based on your performance requirements. The second reason they're important, and this is probably the most important, is where the billing starts. So, as soon as you create your capacity pool, you will be charged, on obviously the billing cycle as it is. So, those 2 reasons. Capacity pools is performance, and also just be aware it's where the billing starts. What is actually really quite cool, which was announced 2 weeks ago, is for capacity pools, you now have the ability to enable what's called cool access tier. So the cool access tier is a feature based on life cycle, based on how old the data is, that will tier the data to essentially a cooler storage tier. The great thing about this is the metadata still resides in the volume. So for instance, end users looking at their data, it doesn't disappear. They still see the yellow folders, they still see the icons, but the storage blocks reside at the cheaper storage layer. So it can introduce quite a considerable saving, and that's available at the standard tier. So the capacity pools, where you say performance, and also just be aware it's where the money starts to be charged. And then within your capacity pools, you place your volumes. So the volumes can range from currently 100 gig up to 100 terabytes. We do also have in public preview large volume support for volumes up to 500 terabytes in capacity, because we have some customers that have capacity requirements well north of 400 terabytes. And those volumes, obviously, Azure NetApp files, it's network attached storage, so it's file-based file storage, file protocol, and we support NFS, SMB, and also dual protocol volume. So when you create your volume, you choose the volume size, you choose a network infrastructure you want to place it into, so essentially your VNet, and you choose the protocol, be that NFS, SMB, or indeed dual protocol. Because again, we have customers that have Linux backends writing to file shares being accessed by Windows front-end clients. So that's a very sort of high-level overview description of Azure NetApp files. And then once you have your volumes created, you simply take the mount path or the UNC path and present that to your host, be that Windows or Linux, and off you go.
All right. Your explanation was so good that I actually imagined the architecture. I just visualized it. That, okay, so people who are actually listening to it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Anthony. So it's like you have a subscription, you have a resource group, then you have your Azure NetApp files. Within that, you have your, your and capacity pools that you call, and then within that, you have your volumes. So that's how the architecture looks like. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that was absolutely, that was nice to hear, because you absolutely described it perfectly. So yeah, correct.
Yeah. So that's how good visualization chart looks like, thanks to your explanation. Anthony, one thing which I believe any user of cloud, or let's talk about enterprise rather instead of an individual user in general, people are very particular about, especially companies are very particular about protecting the data when they're moving onto cloud. I think that's the utmost priority, right? Data protection, or let's suppose disaster recovery management. That's everyone's utmost priority, right? That the data should be secure. And I think Azure NetApp files sort of caters to that requirement as well. We have something known as cross-region replication. If you can sort of just explain as to what cross-region replication is all about.
Yeah, so Azure NetApp Files cross-region replication is essentially a DR technology, so for disaster recovery purposes. It's recently been enhanced to also to do cross-zone replication. So if you're familiar with the Azure constructs, where you've got your regions, and then within regions, not all, but some regions, there are zones. So but cross-region replication is a disaster recovery tool to protect against regional failure. So you configure cross-region replication with the Azure pairs, and there's regional pairs and there's non-regional pairs. I can't remember exactly which ones, but of all the regions we go, again, UK South and West is an example I use. So you can create a volume in UK South, and then you can create a data replication volume in UK West. And what that will do is essentially, it's because this is underpinned with NetApp's technology, Azure NetApp files. Microsoft first-party service delivered on NetApp hardware, NetApp software, and all the great technology that which NetApp has within ONTAP. And it's a snap mirror operation from what is the source volume to your target volume in the other region. And you can set the replication intervals to be 10 minutes, 1 hour, or 1 day, and that's an asynchronous copy to the target, and the target volume is then read-only. To make that read-only copy writable, it's a simple case of just breaking the mirror, the peering. That will instantaneously make it writable. But the great thing about Azure NetApp Files cross-region replication as well is, even though we're talking about network file storage, the actual replication happens at the storage layer. It doesn't happen at the network layer. So there's no network bandwidth charges to factor in. Yes, there is a small charge for the data replication itself, but it's extremely efficient because it happens at block level. And that's another great thing about ANF. The billing mechanism for ANF, you don't need to buy licenses. You don't need to license features. You simply pay for the storage that you consume. And again, that replication is just all part of the storage charge bundled in. So that's cross-region replication. We have in public preview cross-zone replication, which is exactly the same, just not region, it's cross zones. So you can put a volume to say where variable zone 1, and have a volume in zone 3, and then you can use the same method to replicate the data between those volumes.
Right. So in a nutshell, we can say it's like if there's a failure in the one region, cross-region replication, as the name suggests, it helps in replicating the data, and it's like a backup sort of thing in the other region.
So it's disaster recovery. We do also have backup capability in the product as well. We've got the disaster piece. So from the BCDR, if you think about business continuity disaster recovery, then we have cross-region or cross-zone replications for the disaster recovery piece. But Azure NetApp Files also has an inbuilt backup capability, because the great thing about NetApp and NetApp's USPs is snapshotting. The snapshotting technology used within Azure NetApp Files is extremely efficient. The snapshots are very lightweight. But we have a feature called Azure NetApp Files backup policy, where it goes hand in hand with the snapshot policy. So you can set your snapshots on a schedule to say, capture a snapshot, the hourly, daily, weekly, monthly, etc., and then set the retention for those snapshots as to how long they're retained. The Azure NetApp Files backup policy comes along once a day and essentially hoovers up those snapshots, and it takes them off of the ANF media and puts them into essentially what is ZOS storage. And obviously that ticks all the boxes because you're taking the data off of one media, putting it onto another. And they're very efficient. I've worked with a few customers. It is still in preview stage, but I've worked with a few customers that are using it in production, and that they're using that to good effect, because what it's also helping them do is to manage the overhead of the snapshots within the volume, because the snapshots themselves live within the volumes, and that can have a bit of an overhead, depending on the type of data that you're hosting and how often the data churn is. The snapshots can be quite heavyweight. But by using ANF backup, they're offloading those snapshots into ZOS storage, which is then saving the consumption of the volumes and lowering that as well. So, so from a BCDR point of view, we have, you could argue the snapshots are a great way for business continuity, because the snapshots are immutable. So hopefully, if for ransomware, let's say, if you have a ransomware attack and you've got a copy in the snapshot, which is immutable, then you've essentially got a good, safe copy of your data. We've got the replication technology of cross-region and cross-zone, and we've got the Azure NetApp Files backup capability as well.
That was too much in detail. Thank you so much. I think this backup one was pretty much insightful, to understand that. Thank you for that, Anthony. And now that we've spoken about, what Azure NetApp Files is all about, the why part of it is also covered in it. We've spoken about the benefits. You've explained the architecture, the high-level architecture. As we're nearing towards the end of our episode, I would like to wrap it up with the last question. So we know that we have different type of workloads which sort of have different type of requirements and needs at different point of time, right? And certain workloads actually require cloud file storage, right? And if we talk about Azure, now that we are talking about Azure only today, we sort of have two different options. One is Azure Files, and the other one is Azure NetApp Files, right? Can you just help the audience to understand as to in which scenario one should go ahead with Azure Files, and on the other hand, which scenario one should go in for the Azure NetApp Files, like which is the best fit for which types of scenario?
Yeah, that's it's a really interesting one, because as you quite rightly pointed out, there's Azure Files. And Azure Files has different SKUs, from cool, hot, cold, transaction optimized, premium, etc. And they all fit really well. And then there's Azure NetApp Files. Okay. Now, I think why would a customer choose a storage service really does depend on workload. I'd say, what is the workload that they're looking to host? And I think, maybe we'll pick. If we pick, say, VDI as an example, because VDI. Azure Files, I would suggest if you're going to use Azure Files, then Azure Files Premium, because that's the performance SKU for Azure Files. And Azure NetApp Files, why would you choose one over the other? I think Azure Files is a good service. Okay, let's say it does a good job. Where it has limitations is when you start to scale, when you start to grow. In a VDI world, where Azure NetApp Files adds more value, I would argue, at a technical level, an operating level, is as you start to scale the number of users, the number of applications. So as an example, Azure Files, you have a maximum I/O throughput of 100,000 IOPS on a file share. And yes, you can burst, but those obviously bursts are chargeable. Azure NetApp Files, we can scale up to 450,000 IOPS. So we're not limited in that sense. Also, there's an issue with Azure Files. I can't remember. I think Microsoft have recently raised the limit, but the number of open files available is quite limited on Azure Files, where obviously Azure NetApp Files, again, we don't suffer from that open file handle issue. And it's much more scalable, I think. The fact that, with Azure Files in a VDI world, you might end up over provisioning storage to meet performance because you only get so much throughput, so many I/O. With Azure NetApp Files, as I said, we can scale, quite to quite a performance level, and there's no kind of limitation. And you can take volumes from lower performance tiers to higher tiers as well. Obviously, with that caveat, the 7-day cooling off period. And I think the reason Azure NetApp Files exist is all around that high performance and low latency. And I think the latency is another area that I can't remember. I'm pretty sure in the Azure documentation for Azure Files, I think they quote sub 2 millisecond latency for premium, and Azure NetApp Files, we're sub millisecond latency. I have been involved with some customers that had an application or applications that were really highly strung and latency sensitive, that they needed 0.5 millisecond. And we managed to achieve that for them. So that's another, I think, key area why. And it really is the workload that drives that conversation. Azure NetApp Files has 5, I always argue 6 key workloads where we fit really well. SAP, Azure NetApp Files is the only storage service certified for SAP S/4HANA databases as well. And if you know SAP and how highly strung that is, then you'd understand. So the databases, the likes of SQL and Oracle, we fit really well. Already mentioned VDI, so Azure Virtual Desktop, great. Azure NetApp Files for FSLogix managed profiles. High performance compute. I've worked with a few customers who are in high performance compute where we're delivering, again, based on that latency is key. And one which is more recent for the last year is Azure VMware Solution. Azure NetApp Files now has been certified for over a year now for NFS data store support for Azure VMware Solution. So the ability to essentially decouple the storage from the AVS node, which is HCI. So if you need more of anything, if you need more compute storage or memory, you need more nodes, you need more hardware. But most customers are more storage heavy than they are constrained by compute. So they might have to over provision the number of nodes to get the storage capability. But with Azure NetApp Files data stores, you can essentially, you don't need to over provision those nodes. Once you reach your ceiling for CPU, you can then offload the storage capacity to ANF. And I've worked with a few customers where they've really seen value to the point, saving over 50%, as if they went with AVS and the vSAN capability. With Azure NetApp Files data stores, they've saved approximately 50%. So that's another use case. And I think the one that we don't talk about enough is just the unstructured user data. I think if you showed somebody Azure NetApp Files price per gigabyte, they'll go, "Wow, that's expensive." Okay. And I agree. If you look at the bottom line, it seems expensive. But then if you take in the wider TCO, you don't need to feed, water, monitor, manage, and maintain anything because it's a service. You simply consume it. It's adding value because it's highly available. It's performant. It's all of a sudden that TCO starts to stack up. So the unstructured user data, especially with the announcement of cool access tier, where you can tier data based on life cycle to essentially cheaper storage. So those are the 5-6 main areas where you're looking at the decision why you would go for either Azure Files or Azure NetApp Files. I think you start with the workload and understanding the requirement of the workload, and then you get to the commercial conversations and all the other stuff as well. But, yeah.
All right. So we can say, it absolutely depends on the type of workload, right? And like if you sort of wrap it up in one line. So I think that's one. Got it. Understood. So that is the last question from my side, Anthony. And thank you so much. Your entire episode was so insightful. I really got to learn so much from each of the answers that you gave in such detailing. It helped me in visualizing. So thank you so much for that. And any signing off note which you would like to give?
Well, thank you, especially. Likewise, it's been a pleasure. Really nice to meet you in person or virtually and talk. And a privilege to actually be able to talk. And I think if anybody wants to learn anything more, around Azure NetApp files, please reach out to myself. I'm an MVP. I'm part of the technical community. I'm available on LinkedIn or Twitter or any of the media platforms. So please give me a shout. I'd be very happy to help out and offer support.
I can vouch for that. Anthony is a very kind person. Thank you so much, Anthony, once again.